and we can get started. So just reviewing, the last. First off, there's the notes thing. I pasted a link in there if you guys can see it up at the very top. So just please add your name for attendees if you haven't already. Reviewing the minutes from the last meeting. So I think most of these things are still on the agenda. I have permissions now, so I'm logged in as the node guy, which is good for getting this video associated with the recording associated with the node account. So that issue is closed. Everything else is on the agenda, I believe. So we can just start going in through the agenda. So the first thing is integrate C++ async hooks and better API with native abstraction. Ali, I saw that there was some activity on that. You want to talk about it?
Sure. On that issue, I've posted a proposal/plan. I think we have a roadmap on what are the ingredients and what things to go do, and I'm actively going and doing them. So I would encourage people to go take a look and add comments if anybody has them. But yeah, it's progressing well.
Excellent. Okay, so eliminate monkey patching. I think there's been no activity on that I am aware of. I thought we have some general, idea for how to approach it. I think now it's just a problem or an issue of, finding the right people to execute on that. And maybe that's something we can bring up at the Diagnostics Summit. Anybody have any comments on that? Okay, moving on. So the async hooks stable API tracking issue. I don't know if there's been any progress here. I know that I saw some activity, I think maybe from you, Ali, about some of the performance stuff and what can be done there. And I thought I also recall seeing something about a suggestion to make the promise APIs monkey patchable so that people could maybe work around some of the perf limitations, but I'm not 100% up to date on everything that was going on that front.
Yeah, I think that was an idea that Benedict had, and I think that one is pretty much closed at this point. And to give a background to people who are not aware, so one of the things we've been finding is that promise hooks are quite expensive out of all the async hooks, and enabling them by default is something that Node actually doesn't do. When you enable async hooks, promise hooks are not enabled. When you load async hooks, promise hooks are not enabled by default. You have to add a hook in order for the promise hooks to be enabled. So I think Benedict is looking at overall promise performance. And I think there's some work happening. But I think one of the things to keep track of going forward is working with the VA team to come up with maybe some changes to the promise hooks API so that make it more amenable for performance. And I think one of the things that this might cause is that if there are changes in promise hooks that require us to make changes in async hooks, then it makes sense to not move them out of experimental just yet.
Right. So maybe I can elaborate a little bit on this. The one idea that Benedict had, and that the thread is already closed, was to make promises monkey patchable in that the resulting promise of an async function call can be overridden to do additional things like tracking. And that would be all in JavaScript instead of having to call into C++ and pay the cost of doing that. But it's not entirely clear whether that's feasible or whether that can be put up for specification at TC39, because we expect some pushback. One other thing that we thought about is that maybe we can limit the number of candidates that we trigger the hooks for. So Benedict has been talking a lot about temporary promises that's created in V8 as part of the spec that maybe are not all that interesting for tracking with async hooks. And maybe we can just skip them and therefore make things cheaper. On the other end of the discussion is that whether it's actually whether the performance regression is actually all that noticeable in real world, because the 30% number is from a benchmark that really stresses a lot of promises, and it's unclear whether that whether promises will be the bottleneck in real world workloads. So, and one more thing is that there's a lot of the things that is being discussed as part of async hooks that we have had internally with the DevTools team, and we have some solutions there. Maybe we can use the same things there that's already implemented inside of V8, and this way make things faster.
So yeah, there was another proposal on maybe having a JavaScript version of the Promise Hooks API, so that way we wouldn't actually need to transition.
You mean a JavaScript API, meaning that this would have to be spec'd, right?
Potentially, or providing a mechanism at least.
Or do you mean, or do you mean an API in V8's C++ API where you can just put in a JavaScript function as a callback?
The latter.
Okay, I see. Yeah, that would also make sense, because then you also save going back and forth between JavaScript and C++. But the issue here is that the reason we what we do in C++ is also creating a weak handle on the promise so that we get to this try event, right? And I don't know whether that's feasible with a JavaScript implementation.
Okay. Yeah, I guess then the steps going forward. So I was discussing this with Benedict. I think it would be good to open up a tracking issue for Promise Hooks performance and then explore the ideas. And some of the points you raise are valid. I think it would be really useful to have real world impact numbers. So if people are using, I know some of the APM vendors are already using async hooks. And if they have feedback from real world customers, that they can share on how much of a performing impact they see, that would be quite useful.
Yeah. Sorry, I was going to say from last week, I think Daniel and Thomas Watson, you guys said you might be able to find some data. I don't know if you guys had a chance to do that or not.
I reached out to Thomas, but he didn't. I think he's quite busy right now, working somewhere abroad. But I will sync with him then at the Diagnostics Summit, because my problem is I need a tool that at the same time uses async hooks and also measures performance then on this API I have, because everything else would kind of have side effects. So I'm hoping for his version then to run tests against them with. So
yeah, and I'm also hoping to get some more insights in how async hooks are being used at the Diagnostic Summit, because I suspect that there is some overlap with what we already implemented for DevTools.
So can I ask a quick question? And I don't know if I don't quite understand this, or it's still an open issue. Do we understand where the performance overhead is coming from? Is it this native managed boundary crossing? Is it like the init destroy part? Is it tracking the callback part? What's sort of the high cost that's popping up?
So I think there is no one single bottleneck. So one thing is, of course, the cost of crossing the boundary between JavaScript and C++, and we do that, I think, 4 times for the entire lifetime of a promise. Like when you create the promise, when you are about to handle it, and then when you're like afterwards, and then there's the destroy hook. And also, I think having a weak global handle makes things very difficult for GC because it's just not really optimized for that. Yeah.
Also, yeah, and that's needed for the destroy hook.
Right.
And also, other thing to note is that if you do a simple await a promise in a function, that creates 4 promises. And each of those 4 is going to get 4 of these hooks called. So you're talking about a single await calling 16 boundary promises.
Right. That's why I'm talking about maybe we can limit the number of promises where we fire these hooks.
Yep.
Maybe some of the intermediary promises don't actually need to be to fire hooks.
Right. Because there's sort of a client side notion of what the async result is, and the other promises are created sort of for convenience in the implementation.
Well, I don't think it's even convenience. I think they are specified and observable to some degree, I think. I'm not entirely clear on which ones they are.
Because if they're observable, then that's very hard to sort of eliminate tracking on them, right?
Sure, but maybe they are not all that interesting for users to track.
Yeah, that seems, I don't quite understand why that would be the case. But you said that's part of the spec, though?
I think so. I am not all that familiar with the latest spec because last time I looked at the implementation was quite a while ago. But so Benedict did look into it, and I think there were a lot of things because the JavaScript spec is fairly descriptive on which steps to take, and V8 doesn't elide any of those promises currently.
I guess it's like if you need to have those hooks to maintain the context tracking, they'd be important even if they're not interesting.
I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think the context tracking could be for intermediate results, right? You could elide the context tracking, right? You could propagate the context all across the temporary ones. So
okay, so if that's the case, then yeah.
Okay.
This might be good to discuss more, next week. I'm definitely interested in this.
Yeah, and I mean, we also have to define what overhead means here. We have, is it response time overhead? Do we have memory overhead? These are all important parameters then in the end when we want to go in production with that, of course.
And if anybody can have sort of real world data on async hooks impact, that would be really beneficial for next week.
Yeah, maybe we can do it on the fly, even Thomas and me, then when we are in Ottawa post.
Yeah. So, Ali, you said that you were going to open an issue, sort of like to sort of track these different approaches and just kind of synthesize the stuff that we've been discussing here, or somebody else was?
Yes, I'm going to open a tracking bug on the V8 issue tracker so that we have a single place to track overall performance of promise hooks.
Okay.
And we can use that to track all the work that may happen on the V8 side.
Okay. The other thing I'll throw out is I wonder if it's possible, and this doesn't need to be answered now, but I'll just throw it out, that we can track contacts without calling through these various APIs, right? Like the init and destroy and begin and end APIs, right? And if that would make this faster, right? Because at the end of the day, we just need to track some numbers, right? And I realize that this at odds with how async hooks has been designed, but my understanding is the primary use case here is to track context. And if that's the problem we want to solve, maybe we should address that a little bit more directly. But I'll throw that out.
The problem I see is that async await is you cannot, I mean, purely in user land or embedder or host land, you cannot know when a promise resumes after an await. So if you wanted to propagate context into the resumption of a await, that is not currently possible as per the spec. So that's why promise hooks are needed, because async await you cannot keep track of.
Let me see if I can rephrase it a little bit. So in the scenario you talk about, like I want to track context through an async await call, right? Why would I care about the destroy event?
Right. Whether or not destroy event is necessary is a good discussion topic, but
right.
I think you do.
So it's like, I think async hooks sort of captures two things. It captures async propagation and async object lifetime, and they're combined in that one API. And maybe it's not clear if they need to be in the same API, or there should be some ability to pick which parts of the async, I don't know, world you're interested in.
Yeah, and actually, Benedict has been asking on Twitter and elsewhere on whether people have valid use cases for the destroy hook, and people do. But your point is definitely valid that maybe both at the same time doesn't make sense, right? So lifetime is more related to resources and basically automatic cleanup of resources and error propagation, whereas context propagation probably doesn't need the destroy hook, and that would definitely help making some of the performance impact lower.
And I should say that was Mike's comment. I was just giving my perspective on it. So
thank you.
Yeah, he deserves all the credit.
Yeah.
I would like to add that async hooks underpins domains on master, the domain module. The domain module is, unfortunately, even if it's deprecated, still very, very much used in the enterprise world. So, which means that everybody will be impacted by async hooks in one form or another in Node 10, in the next LTS version.
Just because they're using the domain module?
Yes.
Is that going to, like, do we expect a large performance regression? Is that because we've changed?
I haven't run any benchmarks. I'm just noting it as a fact. Okay, I don't have numbers.
Like it's kind of like the async hooks aren't out of experimental, but effectively people are going to be using it even if they're not using the experimental feature, is what you're saying.
Well, domain are experimental, so they move from one experimental to another, to that being implemented on top of another experimental. But domains weren't known for, so I guess there's the concern that I think Michael was talking about was whether they're going to see a regression. And domains weren't necessarily known for being fast. So I'm not sure if there's actually.
No, I'm not. I don't see as fast, or they were notoriously slow. Okay, so I would not concern too much about that. But if as major users of async hooks, like if just wait 3-4 months and you will get as many as you want to some extent.
I think the second point was that I think removing the destroy hook is not an option at this point because domains uses them.
Is there still overhead if you don't have a, like, because I thought the API was such that you can specify whatever callbacks you want for init, destroy, and begin end. And if you don't specify a callback for destroy, is there still overhead incurred? Does anybody know?
I haven't looked at the implementation. I expect there would be overhead because I I don't think the VM knows exactly which hooks are being listened from the embedder side.
Okay.
From VM's point of view, you either have promise hooks or you don't. So I would expect it would have overhead regardless of whether you're looking for the destroy hook.
Okay.
But that could be something that we could sort of look into optimizing.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think that unless anyone has anything else to add, I think the action here is just get an issue open to try and sort of, summarize the different approaches here, and we can track on that going forward. Is there anything else anyone wanted to add on this? Okay. Okay, moving on. So the summit is next week. I checked the weather. I'm a little disappointed.
Never do that. Why? What's the weather looking like?
I don't know. It was like something like it was like a 6-degree thing, Fahrenheit.
6 above?
Yeah, it's warm.
So the ice may melt.
Yeah.
This is 6 Fahrenheit.
6 Fahrenheit. Oh wow. Okay.
6
Well,
Fahrenheit.
Fahrenheit will be plenty cold enough. There'll be ice if people want to skate and stuff.
It's minus 14. Whoa.
Yeah.
Minus 14 Celsius.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I like cold. Yeah. So I saw you posted something for people to get access, like wireless access.
Yeah, once I get the list, I have to, I'll submit something. I think what happens is you'll each get an email with, info and a login you can use when you're there.
Perfect.
The other thing I did is I did make a reservation on a pub that's walking distance away for dinner. We're all on our own for dinner, but I think we can go to the same place. I have lunch coming in on the 2 days, and then like coffee, tea in the morning, but not a breakfast. I don't know if there's anything else people can think of. I checked out the room. We're at 25 people, and the room could hold. And I've got food for 25 people coming. The room could hold a few more people, so we'll all have seats, which is good. I don't know if there's anything. When you get there, it's actually on the left, so there's security, and it's on the left. I'll get there early that day. My understanding is nobody actually has to sign in because it's outside of the main building.
So there's just one building that we show up at.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, like if from the visitor guide, there's one big building, one main entrance, which is pretty obvious. There's a parking lot. Like if you've got a rental car or something, there's a parking lot that's got multi-levels, so you can go indoor if you want. Or as visitors, there's even a little bit of visitor parking out front. And it's the executive briefing center, which is kind of like outside. I don't know if anybody else will be in there, but there's multiple rooms. And so if there isn't, we'll be able to spread out. But otherwise, we have the largest room that holds, it'll hold all of us fairly comfortably.
Okay.
I don't know if anybody can think of anything else I need to set up in advance. I'm hoping I've covered things.
I'm going to share my screen. Whoa.
I have had a few questions about streaming. I know that's always difficult, but we may try and find one volunteer to start up a Hangout and point it at the room.
Would it be possible to get? Oh my God! Sorry. Would it be possible to get like a two-way link? Because I don't think I'll be able to physically be there, but there's a few things that we'd love to talk about.
Well, the Hangout will go both ways. It's just from past experience, it's always very hard for the people on the other end.
Right. Okay.
So we can make the Hangout basically like we'll set up something just like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
But don't set your expectations too high, right?
No, it's fine. I can always message Peter and be like, I'm trying to say something, and then
right, yeah.
So Daniel had put this this Google Doc up so that we could maybe try and fine tune some of the agenda. I took an action item to try and do that. I'm curious if people have feedback. I just took the postmortem tooling and I tried to break it down into sort of the themes, scenarios, what are the desired outcomes, and then just sort of a sketch on what we wanted to talk about. And I'm open to feedback on this. What I was trying to do here was just get something a little bit more structured than what was there before, so that we can kind of move things along and not lose any of the bullet points that Michael had originally put together. So it kind of felt like, and I hope I didn't miss anything, that there was sort of two themes. One is that sort of the current set of tools get broken, and there's this question of, are the current set of postmortem tools the right set of tools? I wanted to understand what scenarios people were actually trying to solve with postmortem tools, and try and understand that as sort of like at an abstraction level. Is it just sufficient to understand the JavaScript stack and the JavaScript heap? Do people actually need to understand what's going on at Node? Do people actually want like a full-on core dump? And then what are the desired outcomes from this postmortem tooling thing? Right. Sorry, go ahead.
The other discussion, which I can't see from the screen because it's a little bit small, is that sort of separate, I think, is we also want to cover the, like, what level of integration do we want to target for Node? Other runtimes will have built-in support for a number of these things, and we should agree as a group, should we be trying to integrate Node report, support for core, heap dumps, or is it having separate modules? Okay, so, and I think that applies to the different, not just postmortem, but other types of things as well.
Yeah. So I thought that maybe I didn't capture it. Like, one of the things that as I sort of broke it out into some discussion points, I sort of have the short term, like, how do you keep existing tools from being broken? And I thought that there was some work that went in to try and add some tests to prevent that. I'm not exactly sure of all the details there. But then longer term is like, what is it that you would want to provide to support postmortem debugging at some of these different levels? I saw that there was one issue that was open in the postmortem working group around with some suggestions of a JavaScript level API.
Yep.
You could possibly extend the CRDP protocol, and then you can have a nice picture where you've got sort of a variety of different tools that basically work off of either this sort of API or this protocol to sort of interact with heap dumps in the same way that somebody would maybe, or in a similar way that somebody would use a debugger. I think there's a number of benefits to that. I don't know if that covers.
No, I would add in somewhere like integration, something like level of integration or something like that. Like, should Node report just be shipped as part of the runtime?
Okay.
The other thing too I wanted to bring up was really around like consistency. I think one of the overarching themes I see is there's a lot of really great tools out there, whether it's postmortem or profiling or whatever else, but they're kind of like, this Venn diagram of the set intersection. Like, some of them have these features and some of them, like, a concrete example would be like, if I were to use the Chrome Dev Tools, it has this thing with retainers, which makes it really easy to like look at, kind of some of the garbage collection, like, which, if I have a memory leak and I can see like this object and walk the retainers list. With like some of the lower level LLNode, the MDB-V8 stuff, I get a lot more detailed information into kind of JavaScript objects and the constructors, but there's not really consistency. And so it'd be really great to have a consistent set of tools that provided a unified set of functionality, right? Because right now, I think our experience has been like, you're kind of hopping back and forth with a bunch of these different tools. And also, I think the other thing is, like, if we approach it from a user perspective, like, what are people actually trying to do with these debugging tools, right? If you use postmortem, one of the primary use cases is memory leaks, and turns out actually it's not really great at debugging memory leaks. It'll try to help you get there, but most of the time it's still more art than science. And so, like, love to talk about kind of, as a group, what, working with the VIA and Chakra folks as well, and the no core guys, like how do we think about, providing the level of abstraction and the actual tooling and sort of the requirements of postmortem, right? Just being able to access core DOMs is really great, but if you can't actually use it to solve some of these really critical problems, what do we need to add to these tools?
Yeah, like certainly if we, one of the outcomes of the discussion could be, hey, here's some use cases, and like our first task is identify the core use cases, then go through and say, what's needed to make those first class,
yep.
and then work on those. And it's sort of like, yeah, okay, memory debugging, we have these pieces, but we don't have these pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something we need to add in terms of APIs that are surfaced in Node, but then implemented by each of the engines that will actually make that job better, right?
Principles of like, hey, what are actually the use cases? What are people trying to use with these tools, right? What are they trying to solve?
Yeah, and I have that here sort of, as one of the desired outcomes is understanding scenarios and priorities, right? And so, as a discussion evolves, I'm hoping that, we can sort of drill in what's needed sort of around some of these different scenarios. It isn't clear to me that low-level tools like, what is it, LL Node or MDB V8 are necessarily useful to sort of a very broad audience. But if that's not the case, if these things are very useful, I think it'd be good to know about them. But that's kind of what I was hoping to walk away from is like, hey, we want to be able to answer this set of questions and then, figure out a plan on how to best approach that in a way that kind of enables the ecosystem to kind of come in and, experiment and play around, right?
Yeah, certainly that's where some of like the, a JavaScript API, we were thinking would maybe make those more broadly consumable by people. Yeah,
that was my thinking as well. I think, like my gut feeling is that it's like the broad majority of JavaScript developers aren't interested in, using things like, LL Node or MDB V8. Maybe I'm wrong. But
I think it's just ergonomics, right? Like, so there's a couple of things. Obviously we should talk about this at the diagnostic.
Yeah.
I don't want to like rat hole, but like I think to keep it to not to put too fine of a point on it, I think it's like, right, there's ergonomics. I think we all agree like using command line kind of text input or debuggers for most people is not super accessible. But I think at a lower level though, from our perspective of having used these tools for years and how critical they are to our deployments, is that there are actually just features that are missing that really makes it difficult to solve a very big class of problems that we see all the time.
And right, and even if general developers don't find these important, if everybody who has production deployments and DevOps finds them very important, that still makes them something.
Like everyone that we talk to in the industry who's running Node at scale, typically has the same problems that we have, and are using the same tools that we have and are struggling with the same tools that we have, right? So I think it would be good to just share that and share our experiences. I think, we talked about kind of taking like 5 or 10 minutes at the start and just sharing our experiences. And that could help set some context on kind of.
Yeah, that's scheduled in. So that's the sort of the kickoff for the first day.
So I guess rather than sort of going into the specifics of the postmortem stuff, what I wanted to do is try and get, have people think about the sort of the framing of the agenda, right? That I have here, which was, just what are the themes, what are the scenarios, what do we want to walk out of here with, what are the desired outcomes, and then some bullet points to sort of drive discussion, right? And there's some overlap between these different things. That's how I structured this. It kind of felt like from what was there was sort of two themes. One is just the tooling, and the other is promises, supporting promises and async functions in a postmortem thing. It looks like there's a big long issue in GitHub on that. I didn't read through that whole thing, so I didn't kind of like synthesize that to the level that I synthesized the tooling stuff. But that's sort of what I was hoping would frame the discussion a little better and maybe make it a little more positive. I'm open to feedback on this. The updates are in that doc that Daniel had put in there. So if you have comments, either just make them in the Google Doc, or ping me somehow.
Well, I noticed that, like, profiling here is actually empty, which is I'm glad it's on the agenda. I think we actually we've written up like this big. We're about to like post a GitHub issue to the Diagnostic Working Group with kind of our thoughts on profiling and like a roadmap. So I guess we'll do that after this meeting, and then we can just drop that into the agenda. Basically, it's around like CPU profiling and sampling, and how do you kind of, on profile and debug an application that's running. So I guess we can add that as a GitHub issue and then drop it into the monitoring section. Something we were working with Yang and the Google folks quite a bit.
That sounds good.
Yeah, and I think Daniel added some context here around the monitoring section. I don't think there's a lot around some of these other sections. So if people feel like that is...
where did tracing go?
I think that's monitoring and tracing.
Because I almost feel like profiling is not really... I kind of want it to be in its own section. It's a pretty meaty topic. And it's kind of like, I'll share it and we can collaborate offline.
Yeah. And I think tracing was one I also wanted as a separate bullet point, just in that, we have a trace engine. We should talk about how we leverage that.
So this doc is available. Has this been? It's available for everyone to comment on, right? And
yep.
Yeah, everybody.
Yeah, you can go in and edit it, and
great.
Sorry, let me see here. Where's the agenda? So there is this bit that was in here. That might have got dropped, I think, as Daniel was going through. And
yeah, if you can just pull that back out, that would be good.
I'll have a look. I think searching the doc for flight recorder, I can remember that I put that in, but
okay. Daniel, do you want to add anything? I'm going to stop sharing here. That's okay. The link to the Word doc is just here in this issue at the very bottom. So, I think that, to the extent that we can have a little more structure around the agenda, I think it'll sort of help move things along with that many people in the room. So if you have ideas or opinions about that, please dive in there.
Yep,
So
having some stuff behind it, and we'll obviously have whatever discussions we have when we're there, but having a starting point is good.
Sorry, Daniel, you were going to say something? Or no?
Nope.
Okay, sorry. Okay, anything else on the summit?
Looking forward to seeing you all there.
Yeah. Okay, moving on. So async context formalization. I've been sort of tweaking some of the visualizations around that. I showed them last time. I'm happy to walk people through some of those. I think, it's starting to kind of take some shape. I think some of the text probably needs some scrubbing. Mark, I don't know if you wanted to comment on that at all.
Sure, yeah. So we've sort of been banging through there. I think the largest change, I have the PR. I don't know, have we merged that in yet, Mike?
I did not.
Okay, so we had a PR that sort of did what Mike was discussing earlier, that splits out the notion of we want to do async context tracking, which is very important to a number of applications like long call stacks or these other types of things, as one category of information we want to track. And then we also have async object lifetime, which is a separate sort of information which you may optionally want to turn on or off depending on your application. So I want to know why a certain callback didn't fire. Well, I need to know, was that object even created? Was it destroyed? Was it canceled? That sort of thing, to support those scenarios. So at this point in time, I think we have a pretty good set of definitions and structure around async lifetime or async context around the lifetime concepts. We're still a little fuzzy on what other metadata we might want to be able to turn off and on in tracking all of this. Line numbers are obvious, maybe call stacks if you want to pay a larger cost. But others are maybe a little more fuzzy. And then I think we need some examples, but otherwise I'm pretty happy with the structure of definitions we have. And I think it's getting to the point where, we can start experimenting with some implementations like Mike is doing, just assuming we have a magic trace, seeing what it looks like, but also going and starting to prototype some of it. So I think it's getting pretty mature and would be a great time for people to dive in and see if it looks reasonable to them, supports applications they care about, that sort of stuff.
I keep meaning to want to do that, but never have quite gotten there. Is it something where you think like a half-hour presentation in one of these meetings would bring people up to speed more quickly, or does it really take, you going off and spending longer to understand what's going on?
I think we, a half-hour presentation could help bring people up to speed. I mean, I'm happy to talk about it informally, or we can schedule a little bit more. The goal is that, the paper might have been a little bit something you need to ponder for a while. This should be accessible and reasonably intuitive. And if it's not, then we need to work on that.
I think half an hour to talk about this would be a really good idea. I think this is something that would really benefit from a overview and as many people are aware of this, the better it is. And all of us might want to read a paper, but fact of the matter is probably not everybody has a time to go after this and go read the paper. So a half an hour overview would be quite helpful, I think, bringing everybody up to speed.
I just pasted a link. So there's sort of like a little README that I added, which I need to work on the text a little bit, but it tries to just kind of cover the primary concepts, and then it links off to the current visualizations, and you can step through the visualizations and look through the code being executed. And I think that might be a good start, but I agree that we need to sort of bring people along in understanding. So we'll talk about just having some kind of a presentation or something to.
Why don't we just schedule that for the next meeting? Take 30 minutes of the hour and do that.
Yeah, either that, or we can try and find some time at the summit to do that. It might be better in person, but.
Yeah, I think in person it would be good. A little easier to have some conversation on any points that are sticky or need more work.
Okay, so we'll try and fit it into one. I think we're gonna have to like time box some of the different areas, but like if we could fit this into the async hooks or whatever section where I guess it's monitoring or tracing, whichever one it fits into there, we could split out that half hour for that.
Yeah, let's play it by ear and see how things. I don't want to derail like conversations that need to happen, but I do think that having sort of well-defined understanding of asynchronous call flow is a significant missing gap, and so I think it's beneficial to be able to discuss that. So let's maybe play it by ear. If we can fit it in, and then I'll make sure that either Mark or myself is on point. Probably Mark.
Yeah. I'll have something 20 minutes or 15 minutes, little slides, and if there's time there, if there's time in the breakout session or next working group meeting, whatever makes sense is great.
Sounds good.
Perfect. Okay.
You guys mind if we move up the? Can we talk about perf node 168? I got it jetting a little bit, so I was wondering if we could move that up and talk about it now, because
I think that's next anyway.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yes, it is. Yeah, we can talk about it now.
Okay, perfect. So I think like part of the problem is, and Yang can probably shed a lot more context there, but basically with the move to the new version of V8 in Node 8, a lot of the kind of the stack sampling techniques we've been using just don't work anymore. And then we've had some discussions with Benedict and Yang and Francisca, and basically I think the summary is that like using external profilers and having having V8 generate a mapping of JavaScript symbols to native stack frame symbols is not something that they are going to support in the future. And what they're going to support is using --prof or the CPU profiler. But that comes with some kind of issues on its own in terms of like it can only sample, it only will show you the JavaScript frames and nothing native. You obviously won't get syscalls because it's inside the process. And currently, like I think the tooling isn't really set up in a way where it's like accessible. Some of them lack APIs, or you have to like write C++ code to actually access some of that stuff. So we've been sponsoring some folks to work on this issue with the V8 folks. And I think we can obviously talk about more about this at the Diagnostics Summit, but I think the general theme that I wanted to get across is, I think being able to sample CPU frames and sort of profile the running process is really, really important. And in the past, we've kind of relied on like external operating system level profilers plus whatever kind of translation tools that VA provided, which they're no longer going to provide. And what I'm looking for is kind of consensus on like, hey, can we think about providing a set of profiling tools for Node and V8 and the other runtimes that's going to be maintained in a first-class thing going forward. That's part of the Node API. And we're happy to initially do the work and sponsor folks to implement stack walkers in V8 using prof or whatever. But I think we're trying to get alignment as like, is the CTC and the VA folks amenable to like continue to maintain that going forward, right? The set of tools.
Right. I think that's the good conversation to have. From my perspective, it's like that's where it comes back to that integration level. In my opinion, there's a certain set of tools that should just come and be supported by the runtime.
Yep.
And it's something like this that, yeah, if we can get consensus that this is one of them, we should have testing within the node, regression tests so that we know if it gets broken. It's one of the release criteria, that kind of stuff. So it's working towards that and how we get there, I think, is the discussion you're bringing up, which is a good thing.
Yeah, I'm about to file an issue on GitHub with kind of all our kind of more context and kind of where we think the roadmap is for getting a set of profiling tools that would work with --prof for the CPU profiler. And so,
yep. I definitely can give a short explanation at the summit on what kind of tools we have, what the state there is, and what capabilities they have. And what kind of solutions we could have. Right.
Yeah, so I think what I'll do is I'll post the issue in Diagnostics, and then I'll tag like Yang and Benedict and maybe you, Michael, anyone who's interested, and then that'll be something we can refer to at the summit to kind of go over. I think the most important thing is like getting alignment to make sure that like, hey, we think this is important. We want to maintain these going forward. We're obviously as Netflix, we're happy to do the work right now to make the changes and work with you guys to make it work. But like we would love to see more community support for this as well, right? So.
Right. I mean, on that front, the challenge is always most people being volunteers. We don't really get people signed up and committed to doing things. Mm-hmm. They work on things that are interesting to them. But the thing we can do is to make it so that it's part of the overall safety net and infrastructure to know when something does get broken.
Right.
And people are then pretty good, as they make their changes, they're pretty good about saying, okay, well, I've got to address all the, the different aspects. The problem is when you can't tell that the changes you're making are going to impact these things.
Right. So obviously getting testing and kind of making the build would be really great because, like it would be a shame to like spend a bunch of effort, make it all work, and then have a new release that like accidentally breaks some stuff, right? So
this is actually a problem that we have in V8 internally as well. We have a bunch of a lot of the profiling tools that we have developed are mostly like started out as tools that we use internally just to see certain profiles to improve the optimizing compiler, and then they just stayed around, and at some point it just broke.
Right. And, so I think it's like you said, we don't break Node. If we could actually get it in, some of the things that we need to be tested in that we don't break Node test suite.
Yeah. I think the other thing would be important is adding documentation because I think what someone mentioned, like, do we even know that people use this stuff? And probably part of the reason they don't is there's no docs and they don't even know that it exists, right? So that's part of it as well. Cool. That's all I wanted. That's all I had. So
So
Yeah, and
you're going to open an issue on that, and that's,
Yeah, probably in the next couple hours. I'm just, I'm just doing some more editing on the issue, and then I'll drop it into GitHub.
Yeah, and I think the key thing is, if you have people who are going to help do some of the heavy lifting, then I think other people, like myself and build team members can help with the CI
Yeah,
job
so we're
type
basically
stuff.
we're sponsoring Matthias to do, and he's unfortunately has some connectivity issues, but he's been doing a lot of the work. And you guys
Right,
probably
okay.
see in our node as well, right? That's kind of all the work that we kind of we've been sponsoring him to do to kind of make the tooling, whether it's postmortem or profiling or whatever else it is, make it better for everyone here.
Yeah, because I think once you get a certain amount of work that's taking place, then other people chip in and do the pieces around, the CI pieces, the other pieces.
In particular, I think at first we need to get alignment, I guess, with the CDC and the VA folks on we have a roadmap, we think, of what we could do to get there, and I want to make sure that it's something that everyone agrees with in terms of the technical implementation. And then once that's there, we're absolutely happy to sponsor Matthias to work on this stuff.
Yeah, in terms of the amount of feedback you'll get, some people will comment, some people won't, but the key thing is having made it visible. That'll make sure that when you get there, everybody's like, oh yeah, okay, I knew that was happening. So even if I didn't have strong feelings, it's like, yeah, I think that should be going in.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so we skipped the tracing thing. It looks like, though, the postmortem issue 50 has been closed just now. So this is metadata for LL node.
Yeah, I just asked Colin about that. So if he closed it, I think we're done.
Perfect. And then so there's a tracing issue, which is 184 or 84, trace event tracking issue. I think, Ali, you were the last one to have some updates on that.
I'm going to have to drop off on that front. So talk to you later.
Actually, I have to drop off
Bye.
just now as
Me
well.
too.
Okay. That's fine. We can touch base on it next time around. Great. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, bye. See you at the summit.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Yep. See you.